Good day, everyone. It's Ryan here again, doing another video, and today we're going to talk about Jesus, but I'm hoping to focus on one particular aspect of Jesus, and that's the fact that he was a human being, um, and uh, and and take a look at the examples he gave us of how to be a human being through direct examples of his own humanity. Um, you know, and I won't be quoting a lot of scripture in this. This isn't necessarily a Bible study because in order to frame this all together, I had to pull from all four of the Gospels and to get the big picture. And so, one of the things I highly recommend to people is that they read all four of the Gospels at least once a year. I also suggest reading them in different versions: King James Version, New International Version, um, whatever you're comfortable with, because the more perspective and more aspect we gain, the more it allows us to consider things. A lot of people will tell you, "Well, only read this version, only read that version," and stuff because they're afraid that you're not capable of understanding God's message. And the reality is God's the one who gives you the message that you're capable of understanding. So um, trust God that when you read anything or study anything, ask God for His direction in what you interpret for that, and how you understand it and how you comprehend it. Ask the Holy Spirit to teach you, right? We don't need to listen to people who are afraid. We need to listen to Christ, who kept telling us not to be afraid. But so this talk will be on the human Jesus. And I have my notes. Like I said, once again, hopefully they're not distracting because I'm going to have to look down quite a bit to read this. And I'm going to try and read through it pretty quickly as much as I can because the point we're going to see here is just outstanding. Okay. So, when teaching or learning or hearing about Jesus, we most often focus on the spiritual authority, message, and sacrifice, purpose, and title of Lord of Lords, Son of God. Even when speaking of the physical life of Jesus, it is often mostly rooted in genealogy, logistics, and fact, like where and when he was, and viewed still from the final perspective of the champion of sin, redeemer of mankind, the King of kings, and Lord of lords, sitting at the right hand of God the Father in heaven in the highest of spiritual realms. But what about Jesus, the flesh man? He himself used the term Son of Man over 80 times to reveal himself. Uh, there are movies and stuff like that have really tried to kind of exemplify, this thing about Christ, about what was he like as a man. The Chosen series is doing an outstanding um, example of portraying that, portraying the Jesus as a man with his friends, having fun, laughing, and stuff like that. Because that's an important thing for us to comprehend that, he wasn't just a rabbi and a Messiah and all that other. He was one of us. And not only did he want us to know about the Father and about the spirit world and reveal the spirit, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, the fact that God is a spirit, all that other kind of stuff. Not only did he want to give us access to that, but he wanted us also to understand how we can be as human beings. Um, so since he did call himself the Son of Man over 80 times, let's take a look at the term. The term Son of Man is rich in meaning and purpose, and it is used in both the Old Testament and New Testament in ways that deeply connect humanity, divine authority, and messianic identity. The origins of the Old Testament, the phrase Son of Man, the Hebrew Ben Adam, literally means human being or mortal. It is used often in the Psalms and prophetic books to refer simply to a human, contrasted with God's divinity. So Christ himself, Jesus was contrasting himself for an example for us. And Psalms 8:4, Ezekiel frequently uses that term. However, it is most famous messianic use comes from Daniel 7:13 through 14, where the Son of Man is a heavenly figure, right? And I will read that one. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. And that's the figure is both human-like and divine, representing a future king who will establish God's eternal kingdom. And that's in Daniel 7, 13 through 14. So he established the Son of Man. And Daniel had that vision, one like the Son of Man, right? So he's tying it to Jesus here was on earth, and how at that time in this vision he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power over everything, right? So why did Christ use this term? Son of Man emphasizes both humanity and exaltation. Son of Man underscores that the Messiah is fully human. Son of Man equals being human, but also uniquely exalted with divine authority. It's relatable and humble. Unlike titles like Son of God or Messiah, which emphasize divinity and kingship, Son of Man highlights Jesus' identification with ordinary humanity, his humility and solidarity with us, his unity with us. Messianic authority and judgment, it points to a role not only of the suffering servant, but also the judge and ruler who will bring God's final kingdom. So he had to tie all that together for that purpose, for establishing who he was both on earth and in heaven. Usage in the New Testament. Jesus uses Son of Man to refer himself over 80 times, right? It connects his mission to Daniel's prophetic vision of the divine human king. It balances identity as both suffering servant, who must be rejected and crucified, and glorious ruler, who will return in power. It conveys humility. He is a human who suffers alongside divine authority. Jesus avoids the more politically charged Messiah or Son of God titles publicly, choosing Son of Man to reveal a deeper paradoxical identity that many did not immediately grasp. So one of the things that I'm going to take a look at here, like I said, this is derived from all four of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And these are, first we'll start with physical examples that Jesus gave us about how we treat others, how we treat ourselves, how we act. Beyond the miracles, right? Not the physical examples of his miracles and all that other kind of stuff, but the depth behind it. Jesus expressed profound physical presence and behavior beyond miracles that set him apart and introduced something truly unique for his time and beyond. Here's a few ways that his physical expression and demeanor were revolutionary. He had a radical presence and authority without force. In all the Gospels, you'll see that the reaction of those around him, he had a presence and an authority that was without force, and this is physically. Jesus didn't need weapons, armies to display, or displays of worldly power, yet people felt compelled by his presence because he carried a calm confidence to him. He could silence crowds or command attention without shouting. He had nonverbal authority. This is coming from his physical presence. A gaze or a simple word would stop storms, heal the sick, or calm fears. And he had physical composure. Even under extreme pressure, his body didn't portray panic or fear. The kind of physical poise combined with spiritual power was deeply unfamiliar in a culture accustomed to military leaders or rhetoricians, people who relying on force or charisma. So at the time, back in those days, force and charisma and all sorts of personality and authority were how people physically would present themselves, right? He was the complete opposite. This kind of physical poise combined with spiritual power was deeply unfamiliar. That's what I said to that time. He used, another example, he used touch. He touched people, physically touched people as healing and connection. In a time when touch was often restricted or taboo, especially regarding sickness, women, or social outcasts, Jesus literally touched lepers. He touched dead people. He touched children and he touched women to heal them, to care for them, to show them compassion. He used touch to heal, to comfort, and to affirm dignity. Um, as soon as somebody gives you a hug or somebody you trust holds your hand, right? So here he approached them from a standpoint that physically was not scary, was not spooky. And then he would reach out and touch them and hold their hand and heal them. He broke social barriers with a simple physical gesture of love through touch. His touch was radically inclusive and restorative. It was a physical sign of grace. He literally took the time to do things that society was completely unaccustomed to at that time. They did not touch each other if they were sick. They did not, they had rules and laws against when you could touch somebody, how you could touch somebody. He broke all those barriers physically. He walked with purpose and endurance. Jesus traveled extensively on foot, often long distances, but beyond physical endurance, he always moved with a purpose in all these times that every step was a part of his mission. His physicality was not passive or weak, but embodied intentionality and discipline. He trained his body in the rhythms and nature of human hardship, showing that spiritual life is also lived through the body. So he trained himself to endure the physical life that was there at the time, and he made it a part of his own strength and used it for teaching, used it for all sorts of stuff like that. But he was a living example to the disciples and those that followed him. And he also physically expressed his emotions. Jesus, his body communicated what words could not, right? He wept openly in John 11:35. He expressed compassion through gestures, like lifting up children, touching the untouchable people. His gesture, his physicality was something that was healing, graceful, loving, and caring. He showed anger by overturning the tables in the temple to restore the sovereignty of God's temple, and falling to the ground in Gethsemane in surrender, right? He didn't hide these things. He didn't hide his emotions physically. He let them come out. He let people see him weep. He let people see him angry. And he didn't hide any of this. His body language was transparent and authentic, modeling emotional maturity physically, right? Another thing he did physically that was just outstanding for the time and a good example for us. He shared meals and physical hospitality. Jesus often ate with sinners, tax collectors, and outcasts, breaking physical and social taboos. Sharing food wasn't just about nutrition. It was a ritual of acceptance and community. So it was a bold statement for him to physically put himself in the presence of those that the rest of society looked down upon. Great example for us. He introduced physical fellowship as spiritual kinship, right? In doing so, he reshaped the meaning of communal eating, not exclusively, but inclusively, right? This was a very important aspect. You got to consider at the time how important it was for people to appear outwardly as righteous, as holy, as all this stuff, all an act, right? And he broke that act and did something honestly and lovingly and kindly by accepting all and sitting with them at their tables and eating with them and sharing the message of the kingdom of God with those that other people wouldn't even talk to, right? He physically allowed himself to be seen doing that. Once again, as an example for us. So this is the human Jesus. He expressed humility physically. The ultimate physical expression of Jesus' teaching was his washing of the disciples' feet. He literally, that was a task reserved for the lowest of servants. He physically humbled himself to serve others. He went places to go heal people. He was willing to go places to go heal people. He was willing to go to a Roman soldier's home to heal his son. And the Roman soldier expressed so much faith that he didn't even have to, right? But this was not just symbolic, it demonstrated a new physical ethic, power shown in service, not dominance. That is where we get power. We get power in service, not by exerting human power. By exerting human service, do we have human power? Physically, he was a force of nature, right? I'm sure he was probably very strong. Being a carpenter, growing up doing carpentry work at that time was not easy labor. Sure, there were times that you could do fine detail and craftsmanship, but you're swinging hammers, you're chiseling stuff, you're carrying wood, you're building, right? A craftsman was a very physically present person, right? Jesus could intimidate people if he wanted to, but he physically approached people from a standpoint of grace, care, compassion, that he outwardly, others could see in him. So much so that he could literally touch them, though nobody would touch them, and heal them and care for them. And he showed us not to be afraid to express ourselves physically in a world that tells us we're not supposed to. All right, let's take a look at some of his intellectual manners of humanity and how he handled himself intellectually and some of the prowess he had intellectually, because this required a brain, right? It required experience. And so his intellectual example for us that we can follow, like how do we be a better human being? How do we act out in the world? Here are the examples of how he intellectually handled things. Jesus introduced a form of reason that transcended logic. He brought reason into the realm of love and love into the realm of reason. Before Jesus, reason was largely the domain of Greek philosophers who valued logic, form, ethics, and metaphysics. People like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. I'm not including the Asian and other geological areas, but just the area where all this took place, right? That was how logic was understood. Jewish sages who reasoned from the law, the Torah, precedent and tradition, a form of sacred logic rooted in covenant and command. So their form of reason and logic and high intellect came from, ethics, metaphysics, morals, logic, all that stuff. But Jesus introduced a new axis of reasoning, not in opposition to truth, but above truth. An example is he would say, "You have heard it said, but I say to you this," right? With one phrase, he turned legal reasoning into transformative grace. Because if you listen to the legal reasoning, "You have heard it said that if you do this, but I say to you," in all that, you'll see how he transforms things from legal law to grace. He redefined justice as mercy, strength as humility, victory as sacrifice, knowledge as childlike faith, power as service, and law as love fulfilled. This was not irrational. It was supra-rational. It reached higher than debate or deduction. It was a reasoning that only the heart tuned to heaven could really understand and hear, because it is a logic that is beyond just the physical brain. It required us to consider, meditate, pray about, and seek the wisdom in what he was sharing. So it also brought us to a place where, in considering his logic, we would go to God in order, So he was bridging the gap through reason. He taught in paradox, right? The language of heavenly logic. Jesus consistently used apparent contradiction as a form of truth revelation. Things like, "The last shall be first. He who loses his life will find it. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Love your enemies. Be perfect as your Father is perfect," right? And all of this in it, once again, causes us to logically think, well, how can this be true? We know we can't be perfect. It's God's grace that makes us perfect. So how can we be perfect as your Father is perfect? By practicing the principles of God are we experiencers, vessels, and transmitters of perfection. And we are perfected in that moment because we get the entire lesson. It's like when you help somebody and you feel so good about it later on, and you don't need to tell others. You're not. It's not an issue of pride or anything else like that. It's just a moment of thankfulness and gratitude. Hey, thank you so much that I was able to help that old man today. I feel wonderful. I feel like it was the right thing. Put a big smile on his face. He would have been in a lot of trouble, and a whole problem averted. And I made a friend. Right. The whole experience is perfect. This was not meant. Jesus's contradictions were not meant to confuse, but to invert worldly logic and expose its limits. It disarmed intellect so that the soul could receive the revelation. His reasoning was not rooted in winning an argument, but in awakening reality. He reasoned not just to convince, but to convert. And I touched on that with It Takes Us to God. Jesus never reasoned merely to win minds. He sought to pierce the heart. When he said to the Pharisees, "Go and learn what this means, I desire mercy, not sacrifice," that's what he was doing. He was using a rabbinic device, but in a way that turned their entire framework inside out. He taught that truth without love is dead, that wisdom without humility is blindness. He also introduced logos as a person, the logic of God embodied, right? Logos, the word. He was the word. The Gospel of John begins with the bold philosophical claim: in the beginning was the Logos, was the Word, and the Logos was made flesh. Jesus wasn't teaching logic. He was the logic of God in human form, the divine pattern, reason, and wisdom of the universe incarnated. And he was able to transmit this stuff with the physical limitations and the mental limitations of being a human being, which means, as he said, "You will do greater things than I," which means this is not something beyond us. This was an example for us at how we can express things, and maybe get a message across to another human being a little bit clearer, because we're using the same principles that he used himself. So he wasn't just teaching logic. He was the logic of God, right? The Greeks saw logos as an impersonal principle. But Jesus said, "Follow me." So the word said, "Follow me." The word spoke back. He introduced spiritual reasoning, which was accessible only to the humble. Matthew 11:25, he said, "I thank you, Father, that you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children." Why? Because our intent makes all the difference in the world. Seek and you will find. If I intend to find fault with you, I will find fault with you. If I seek to humble myself and say, "Hey, this is stuff I don't know. I need to listen. I want to listen to what they have to say. I want to gain as much perspective as I can. God, help me to have an open mind." Then we will find like little children, right? That idea of his wasn't anti-intellectual. It's anti-arrogance. When he said, "Thank you for hiding these things from the wise," right? Jesus revealed a wisdom that cannot be grasped by force, only by faith, surrender, and love. God's wisdom that he was trying to express to us through his example as a human being, through his own logic, is one that cannot be bought. You cannot get an education about. It's only by faith, surrender, and love. Jesus didn't reason better than others. He changed what reason was. He introduced a new level of reason, and one in which people got it. They understood. Look at the Roman soldier who asked him to heal his son. He got it, right? And he wasn't Jewish. He wasn't particularly, probably a religious or spiritual man, but because obviously he was listening with that childlike faith of, what's this all about? And he actually listened to what the guy, Jesus was saying all the times that he heard him. Did he become convinced that this was something special? It was a logic he could not argue against. Jesus showed that truth is not proven. Truth is revealed. That love is not an emotion. It is the highest of all intellect. And that the mind must bow to the heart not in stupidity, but in sacred awe, right? And that's part of that physical stuff too. He allowed it to be his heart to be physically shown. So let's take a little bit deeper into his intellect. Jesus was not just spiritually radiant, he was intellectually revolutionary in ways that broke the boundaries of both Jewish and Greco-Roman thought. His mind was a fire that lit hearts, but also a sword that cut through falsehood and shallow understanding. Here are some core ways Jesus demonstrated intellectual superiority, not just in knowledge, but in depth, originality, and transcendent clarity of thought. And see, those are the things I've always taken great interest in, which is why I wanted to share this from the standpoint of Jesus as the man, not as the Son of God, but as the man. So he reframed morality from an external thing to an internal thing, right? Which, by the way, is what gives us authority. The external morality is where someone else has set a law and a precedent that you must obey. But if morality becomes an internal thing, you have the authority. At the time, moral excellence was judged by Jewish law, right? External obedience, actions, rituals, sacrifices, stuff like that. And Greek ethics, virtues like moderation, justice, courage, often achieved through self-discipline and reason. Once again, everything on the outside, a performance, right? And which sets us all up to lie because we want to appear to have achieved these goals. And so we will fake that we have achieved those goals and pretend we have achieved those goals, and we will create a false idol of ourselves that we are asking other people to worship and accept as us. But Jesus said, you have heard it say, but I say to you, right? And then he deepened those laws by saying that lust is actually adultery in the heart, right? Hate is murder in the soul. External compliance means nothing without internal transformation, right? If you want to kill your brother in your heart, in the realm of the spirit, you have killed him. And of course, you are living with that truth that is revealed when we look at our heart, right? Truth has to be revealed. It can't be taught or forced or anything. It has to be revealed. And so only my truth really can I reveal. And I can reveal the truth that, man, I'm really angry at this person and I'm wishing bad things for them. And by revealing that truth, can I then humble myself, ask for help, ask God to help me learn to forgive this person, or learn to let it go, learn to trust God instead of my own instincts and my own way and my own intellect as to what's right and wrong, good, bad, all that other kind of stuff. So by making it internal, do we get to actually solve the problem of what created it all in the first place, which was fear. These methods of his was radically internal. He introduced the primacy of motive, something that the law acknowledged, but it did not center. Motive and actual true desire seem to be all that actually matters to God. We don't have to be perfect in ritual and observance and all this other kind of stuff. If we have a desire to know God, God will show us God. God has a desire for us to know God. So we, once again, both of us, God and ourselves, have come into an agreement. And wherever I agree with God, what on earth could stop it, right? He unraveled traps set by experts. He was a master of this intellectually. Jesus frequently outmaneuvered religious leaders, scholars, and those who tried to trap him with cleverness. One example is, should we pay taxes to Caesar? If he said yes, he would have angered Jewish nationalists, right? If he said no, he would be arrested by Rome. So it was a trap. These people trying to trap him and trying to trip him up and trying to expose him, right? Because in their hearts, their truth was darkness, not light, which is why I said, you were your father, and he was a liar from the beginning. But Jesus said instead, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. An answer that was brilliantly unassailable, yet deeply spiritual, pointing to a higher allegiance than either side imagined, right? If we can understand that, then we ourselves are capable of that form of intellect within our own minds, right? But it was revolutionary at the time. And he gave this to us, and a lot of us can understand, wow, we can look at that. And the only reason why it impresses us is because we comprehend it, right? So he did this constantly, this kind of thing. With the woman caught in adultery, he said, yeah, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, right? Shut them all up. With the question of resurrection, he said, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. With arguments over the Sabbath and divorce and fasting, he exposed their shallowness, not by aggression, but by elevating the conversation to a place they could not follow unless they had humility. They would have had humility to follow him to that level of intellect. And pride will not allow you to. The need to make others wrong puts us in a place where we are living in wrongs and seeking wrongs, so therefore we find wrongs. The only way to see and notice what is right is to want to seek right, what is right and what is good. And they could not follow him there because that is not what was in their hearts, right? And so intellectually, we pay attention to another person's motives and desires or what they're trying to do with us, right? And then as soon as we were aware of that, we too, on an intellectual level, can elevate the conversation to a place that they can't even follow or argue with us, right? So once again, he mastered paradox, right? Which was the language of higher wisdom. The common intellect avoids contradiction. Jesus used it to open eyes, right? Lose your life to find it. The greatest of you is the servant. Blessed are the poor. Love your enemies. Makes no sense, right? Once again, it's not illogical, but metalogical. It reveals truth that can't be reached by the intellect alone, only by surrender, humility, and trust. No philosopher or rabbi before him wielded paradox in such precision and beauty. He made mystery a vehicle for revelation. And if you look out throughout history and a lot of the stuff that was written in that era, at that time, for a long time before that, it didn't exist. That was not how, so he brought a new intellect, right? He reshaped the use of language itself, right? He used parables that encoded multi-layered truths, which were simple for the open-hearted, confounding to the proud. Once again, we explain kind of why. Repetition and rhyme, like poetry and song. And we may not pick that up in English, but in the language that he spoke, that was there. Now we can see it in the framework. Blessed are these, blah, blah, blah. Blessed are those. Blessed are, But there's more to it than that. Hyperbole, to awaken spiritual urgency. Things like cut off your hand, right? Irony and humor. You strain out the gnat, but swallow the camel. Now, one of the reasons why that's also, part of poetry is because in his language, the word gnat and camel sound very similar, right? So it would have had a rhythm and a rhyme to it, like a rap, which also shows intellectual prowess. It shows creativity, right? And obviously he chose all those words very specifically. So he wasn't just giving lessons, he was forming minds. He spoke in a way that grew with the listener, like seeds unfolding over time. So his example of his intellect is to help form our minds and our intellect, even on our limited experience as a flesh human being. He saw through people, not just what they said, right? Time after time, the Gospels say, but Jesus, knowing their thoughts or perceiving their hearts, but he didn't answer their words. He answered their motives. Like a lot of us want to argue with people how wrong they are about their facts, figures, details, and all this kind of stuff like that. He didn't do that. He argued their motives. This is divine insight. Yes, it also shows a mind that listened beneath the surface. His understanding wasn't transactional. It was penetrating. He saw the soul, not just the sentence. So and you know what, I'll say a little bit more about that later, I think, in the stuff that I wrote here. He redefined power, kingship, and destiny. Jesus taught that true power is in humility. because we can't solve a problem unless we first admit the problem. And if we're the problem, if our pride's the problem, our need to punish, our desire that other people do, our will, we'll never have power to solve that problem without first revealing the truth to ourselves and then to others, and so that we can solve the problem. He revealed that true greatness is in service, right? That's where the kingship, true freedom is in the submission to God's will. It is my own personal will that traps me every time. I think this will make me happy, but in the end, it doesn't make me happy. Think about all the times we've chased money, property, prestige, women, men, drugs, alcohol, a new car. How many guitars can you have before you're happy? How many pairs of shoes can you have before you're somewhere along the line you realize that's never enough, because we're putting our reliance on things that are physical, and that happiness is short-lived. Everything physical dies and goes away and becomes like dust, including our flesh. But in the flesh, Jesus himself exuded and showed us things that we can do physically in our flesh to help enhance our journey with human beings and with God. The true king comes riding on a donkey, not a war horse. So he himself expressed humility, submission to God's will, and service. No emperor, philosopher, or rabbi could have imagined that type of intellect at the time. It was cosmically subversive, and it still is. He didn't just teach new ethic, he embodied it. He was the intellect of heaven cloaked in the vulnerability of love and a human being. So now let's look at something even grander that ties it all together. The gifts of Jesus' emotional example. The emotional example he gave us that we can follow as human beings in expressing our emotions, that he himself showed us through his own example. Jesus didn't bring a new topic, just bring a new topic of love. He embodied a level of emotional maturity that had rarely, if ever, been witnessed in human history. His emotional life was balanced, deep, unshakably rooted, and radically others-centered. Not centered in himself, but centered in others. He had total integration of emotion, spirit, and action. Most people then and now, most people on earth, we're fragmented, right? Our emotions, either they rule us or we suppress our emotions to appear strong, right? We're just emotionally a wreck because of this need to, well, like I said, once again, we want the reward and we don't want the punishment of what living on earth is like. He did something different. He lived in perfect harmony between feeling, wisdom, and will. He felt everything, but he wasn't controlled by anything. Like I said, Jesus wept. That was one example in John 11:35. He didn't hide his grief, yet neither did it paralyze him. He mourned the death of Lazarus, even though he knew the resurrection was coming. That reveals emotional presence, not just purpose. So even though he knew the truth that he was going to go to God and ask that Lazarus be raised, and he had the faith to know that it would happen, which he proved in his prayer. Thank you, God, for hearing me. I know you always hear me. He still he allowed himself to feel in that moment his sorrow and sadness at Lazarus' death, and showed it to us, so much so that it could be written down and people saw it. So he lived with a heart opened enough to break, yet whole enough to heal others. He had fearless vulnerability. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus cried out, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He fell to the ground in agony, sweating blood, and still he said, "Not my will, but yours be done." This is an emotional courage beyond stoicism. He did not fear being seen as weak. He was a teacher and the rabbi and the Son of God to his disciples. And he still let them see him as a human being emotionally. So this was for us. This was an example for us that it's okay that other people see when we are emotionally struggling. And he did it with some trusted friends, and even with the trusted friends, they couldn't even stay awake, right? He didn't fake bravery. He let himself feel it all and then chose obedience through love. This was completely revolutionary. We use our emotions to, we humans oftentimes use our emotions to justify our behavior and to get out of things and get out of responsibilities. Well, he let himself feel it all, express it all, and still chose to do what was right. He showed us that emotionally, we as human beings are capable of doing this even while we're dealing with something that is as grave as death and fearing of death, that it is still just a choice we make. And we have the ability as human beings, emotionally, if we allow ourselves to feel it, then we can make a decision, right? But if we try to stuff it, hide it, or use it as a tool to excuse our behavior or ourselves, then years later we still resent it and we still feel it and we still struggle with it strongly, rather than just, the normal, when I dwell upon this, I still feel sad. Well, of course we do. We're supposed to, right? Feel sad when we think about something sad. He had freedom from ego and a need. He had freedom for the need for validation. He didn't need to be validated. How do we know this? Because if you read all the gospel, you'll notice Jesus never got defensive, ever. When praised, he pointed to the Father. When attacked, he answered wisely, or he stayed silent. Like I said, he didn't answer their words, he answered their motives. When he was misunderstood, he didn't rush to explain. He didn't need to be validated, right? And when he was betrayed, he forgave. He didn't respond to the kind of reactive, ego-driven defensiveness that's common for us, like lashing out, shutting down, or pushing back aggressively to protect his image or pride. He had no image or pride to protect. He showed us that as a human being, we have the ability to achieve this with the help of God and the faith in God as he had. But that doesn't mean he was passive or silent. In fact, Jesus he firmly corrected misconceptions. For example, when the Pharisees accused him or misunderstood him, he didn't just bow out. He challenged their hypocrisy directly, but he just didn't do it with pride and a need to explain. He asserted his authority, especially when teaching or clarifying his identity. He constantly revealed himself. He said where he came from. He confronted falsehoods boldly, like when he cleared the temple or called out the religious leaders as whitewashed tombs. Right? So his defense was measured, wise, and purposeful, not reactive or defensive in the emotional, ego-driven sense. And I, a man who has spent most of my life defending myself in an emotional, ego-driven sense, I don't see any of those principles and anything written about Jesus and his responses anywhere in the Gospels. I'm well aware of the other side of the coin. I know what that looks like. He was centered on truth and love rather than personal image or power, because remember, he had a message to carry. And that message was not about him, but about God the Father and us. And he was the messenger. He was the Messiah. He was the Redeemer. He was the one who was solving the problem. He was non-aggressive, but firm. He used questions, parables, and authority to make his point clearly without anger or bitterness. In short, Jesus never wasted energy on ego-protective defensiveness, but was fully engaged and assertive when truth and justice demanded it. He had no fragile self to protect, no image to uphold. That's the ultimate emotional freedom. When we're able to speak the truth, no matter how something feels. He had unconditional compassion without sentimentalism. He felt deep compassion even for those who would reject him. He said, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks." Right? His compassion wasn't just a feeling, it led to action. Because he touched lepers, he listened to the despised, he defended the shamed, and he wept over the hard-hearted. These are actions he took, things he did that were all a part of his physical life on earth, his humanity on earth. And yet he never enabled sin, nor did he dilute the truth to gain affection. His love was pure, not performative. If people did not approve of him, it did not change what he did. Why? Because he took no actions based in fear. That's how he was able to do it. And when we do that, we're not put in a position where we have to enable sin or dilute the truth to gain affection, right? Anger without destruction. When he flipped the tables in the temple, it wasn't out of an emotional impulsiveness or ego. It was measured. He made a whip. That takes time. It was purposeful. He was defending what was sacred. He wasn't defending himself. He was defending God's temple. It was clean. Nobody was harmed. It was the tables he overturned. It was not a rage-driven chaos where people, where he was chasing people with the whip, right? So his anger was like a holy fire, not a human tantrum. That is very rare, especially in male leadership at the time. It is rare for male leadership at this time, too. He showed empathy for people who were marginalized. Where society was emotionally numb to the suffering of outsiders, Jesus noticed children, whom the culture often ignored, women, especially those considered impure or scandalous, foreigners like the Samaritan woman, and criminals. Even the thief on the cross did he show empathy for. His empathy was not performative. It was deep, present, and personal. That is a huge lesson for us. How much are we accepting and welcoming of those who are children, women, foreigners, criminals, people who look bad, people who still look bad, people who are still, according to society, doing things that are wrong in society, right? Are we willing to help even the worst of us? He was. And he emotionally let himself feel it. He emotionally showed us that he let himself feel it, and yet he was still emotionally there and open to them all. He had forgiveness amidst unthinkable pain. Perhaps the most emotionally transcendent act. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He said this while writhing in pain, surrounded by mocking voices, while he was being betrayed, denied, and tortured. If anything would separate him from God at that moment, it would be what makes it difficult for us to have faith? Pain. What makes it difficult for us to have hope? Pain. He had the worst of it all, and he showed us that if we trust and rely on God, and we have made a commitment to do so, that even in the worst moments, we are capable as human flesh beings, because he was going through human flesh agony, pain, and despising the shame of what he had to go through, being stripped down and exposed to all of everyone there, that we could still be in a place. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. That's just divine level emotional maturity. Not just turning the other cheek, but interceding for our killers while dying by their own hands. So did Jesus, that's the question then, right? Did he introduce a new emotional maturity? Of course he did. He taught and modeled that an emotional life, a strong emotional life rooted in God, is unshaken by insult, unafraid of vulnerability, unbound by pride, unmoved by flattery, and unyielding in compassion. No rabbi, philosopher, or sage of that time or since has fully matched the emotional depth, balance, and selfless beauty of the mind and heart of Jesus Christ, that he showed us himself as a human being on this earth. I want to go back to the crucifixion as some final thoughts here about this. Because the crucifixion is one of the most powerful displays of Jesus' integrated physical, intellectual, and emotional prowess. In that moment of ultimate suffering, he expressed the fullness of divine humanity, not in overwhelming displays of might, but in restraint, in wisdom, and in love under extreme pressure. To examine all three of those dimensions, his physical prowess during endurance and purpose. He endured excruciating pain without collapsing into rage, self-pity, or retaliation. The crucifixion was engineered to break the body and will, yet Jesus remained conscious, he remained present, and he remained purposeful. And he was able to display that for all to see because of his trust in God rather than trust in self. He was able to do this as a living flesh human being. He retained bodily control enough to speak, to comfort others, to forgive, and to entrust his spirit to the Father during a time. I couldn't even imagine what he was going through. In allowing himself to be crucified, he redefined physical strength as sacrificial endurance, not violent resistance. His broken body became a living altar for us to understand and comprehend what a great gift it was that he paid for the wrongs of the world that we ourselves had been deceived by and believe to this day to be rights, and goodness, and this is the way it should be, and he paid for all that and tried to show us the difference emotionally, physically, and mentally. Like I said, we're not getting into the spiritual stuff here. This is about Jesus the man. And one example, though, of what I was just saying is that in John 10:18, when he said, "No one takes it from me," his life, "but I lay it down of my own accord." Once again, showing us that the choices we make and the decisions we make through honesty, humility, and the truth, whatever our truth is how we have authority and power, not by exerting authority and power. He had intellectual prowess during the crucifixion. Even in agony, Jesus displayed mental clarity and spiritual insight. He quoted scripture at that time, like Psalms 22, signaling that this suffering was foretold, not a failure, but a fulfillment. He was able to quote that during all that. His response, with precision to taunts, like I said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." It wasn't just mercy. This is an understanding of ignorance versus willful malice, and a profound psychological and theological insight as to the power of Christ, or power of Jesus as a man suffering. He made deliberate declarations, showing once again that he was intellectually still there. He said things like, "It is finished." That revealed a cosmic awareness. He wasn't just dying, he was completing something, and he spoke it so that we would hear it and we would understand, and he would fulfill his purpose. Emotional prowess, during the crucifixion, Jesus showed emotional mastery. He had compassion for his mother and the thief beside him while he himself was in extreme agony. He showed forgiveness for executioners and mockers. There's no way he could fake that in the midst of all that. He showed literal, actual compassion and forgiveness, and transparency in grief with God. "Why have you forsaken me?" Once again, he allowed us to see his humanity. And it was okay. His emotions weren't suppressed. They were expressed righteously. He wept, he thirsted, he ached, and through it all he remained anchored in love. His ability to love while being betrayed, tortured, and abandoned was unmatched emotional strength, the perfection of peace under pressure. So, Jesus was a man who shows us the pinnacle of what we can find and what humanity can be if we follow God. It's a triple prowess: Physical, intellectual, and emotional mastery. His intellectual mastery introduced a new logic rooted in profound spiritual truth and practical wisdom. He taught with authority, using parables, poetry, and paradox to awaken deeper understanding. He had challenged established thinking, offering a higher reason that combined justice, mercy, and love. Now, challenging it wasn't in aggression, as we pointed out. It wasn't, he just taught that way. He had emotional mastery. He embodied radical emotional maturity, vulnerability without weakness, compassion without compromise, and fearless forgiveness. Well, if I forgive him, he'll just do it again. He just said things like, go and sin no more. Your sins are forgiven. He displayed authentic emotional presence, grief, joy, anger, and peace in perfect harmony. Because like I said, he used none of them as an excuse for bad behavior, bad choices, running away, hiding, denying, taking it out on somebody else. He never made someone else pay for his feelings, ever. Ever. You won't see it anywhere in the Gospels that he made someone else pay for his feelings. You will never see where he blamed someone else for his feelings. He modeled empathy and love beyond cultural boundaries, embracing and marginalized without losing clarity of truth. His emotional mastery was outstanding, something that we can achieve following God while we are flesh human beings. We can be at a place where we no longer emotionally need to lash out at other people because of our pain, even if they are responsible for our pain. We can feel our pain, know our pain, and still, through God's power and God's help, take the next step in our life in a way that we ourselves will agree with and not have any shame, guilt, or anything else like that, We all understand the stupidity to eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. I'm not going to justify a crime another does against me by becoming him and committing the same crime against them. Matter of fact, I've never punished anybody in a balanced way anyway. Somebody hurts me, I hurt them over and over and over and over. I keep hurting them. I tell other people about what they did to me. Right? They hurt me once, I hurt them over and over and over again. He didn't do it ever. He didn't hurt anybody because of the hurt they gave him. Matter of fact, he forgave them. And he showed us that we can achieve that through trust and faith in God and following Jesus Christ, right? His physical mastery, he expressed authority without aggression, captivating crowds by presence alone. He broke social norms through inclusive touch and hospitality, healing and affirming the outcasts, people who were walked around every day of their life probably extremely alone, extremely lonely. He demonstrated humble service through acts like washing feet, showing power in servant leadership. He exhibited endurance and purposeful movement, living a life fully integrated in body, mind, and spirit. In essence, Jesus did not simply teach, he embodied a holistic greatness. He fused mind, heart, and body into a living revelation of divine human potential. His intellect pierced the veil of conventional wisdom. His emotions broke barriers of fear and hatred with unshakable love. And his physical presence redefined power as humble service and compassionate action. These are the things we find about Jesus Christ, the man, in the Gospels of the New Testament. And like I said, every story and movie and stuff like that tries to express these things, right? So I wanted to go through the Gospels and break down the things that we see in them that were shown to us about his physical prowess, about his emotional prowess, about his intellectual prowess, because those things were what he was trying to give us. He was showing it. It was part of the message, right? Because he wasn't just the Son of God, he was the Son of Man. And he wanted to give us the pathway to how we can live as he lived. Regardless of the circumstances, we can still be free if we trust God, if we deny ourselves, pick up our cross, and follow him. And denying self, it doesn't mean I deny that I matter or I deny that I have worth. It's that I deny my own selfish will, that it is just all about me. I deny my ego. And denying it, once again, doesn't mean we bury it and hide it. What it means is I accuse, basically, my ego of what it really is. You are just a trap, right? You will keep me in utter isolation. I will always have to be right, and you will always have to be wrong. I will always have to be the strongest, and you will always have to be the weakest. I will always have to try and prove I'm better than you. Now, if I'm better than you, why do I have to try and prove it? It is proof I'm not. So therefore, the entire logic behind it is ridiculous. So all Christ is asking us and denying ourselves is to deny the things in you that are death, are worthless, have no value. They lie to you. You know? Well, I'm better than this person because I have a bigger house. I'm better than that person because I have a nicer car. And oh, look at that person, they're poor. They must be doing something wrong. All of that comes from the fact that we actually don't have any power. We don't have any self-respect. Because if we had self-respect, we would respect the person who's struggling, who's poor. I don't need to learn how to respect others so much as I need to learn how to respect myself. Because when I respect myself, I automatically respect others. Once again, I'm not a victim. The problem is in me. Christ showed us, physically, emotionally, and intellectually, how we can help solve some of those problems in us. When this happens to us, respond this way. When this goes on, respond that way. And you will retrain yourself and retrain your mind and retrain your feelings and retrain your heart and retrain your actual desire, because you will be admitting it to yourself. I want to harm somebody because I feel so powerless right now. Somebody hurt me and I'm mad that they were stronger than me. And so I have to take it out on someone else. That wouldn't have to happen if I was powerful. First of all, somebody else couldn't harm me in an emotional way. Nor would I ever seek to harm somebody else as justification for my feelings, then thinking that I have done nothing wrong because it was done to me first. Christ answered that too. Whenever they hate you, know they hated me first. And he wasn't just talking about him as the flesh man at that point. He was talking about since the beginning. You know, I am blown away at the story of Jesus Christ. I always have been. That he was a man that lived as a man, had to eat, had to sleep, had desires, had to do everything we had to do. Probably had pimples. My sister brought that up to me about something that one of her girls asked her one time. He was a man. He sweat, he got hot, he got cold. He had to deal with his mind that it wanders and wonders. Well, how am I going to eat? How am I going to do this? How talks to us with fear all the time because the mind is going to go into the grave and die, right? The brain. So it's constantly worried about what it's going to get next. But if we rely on the Spirit and the Holy Spirit and God, we will be able to champion all these things we will be able to champion our physical presence. We will be able to champion our emotional example, and we will be able to champion the intellect of the world and our own. we will find ourselves speaking about things and saying things beyond our own wisdom. Because, maybe we're doing an act of service to another human being, and God knows what that person needs to hear in order for help to be given to them and us. Humbly seeking that God guide us in how we help another human being will speak through us and will give us the words that other person needs to hear. And it could even be something that to us sounds stupid, right? Like, that was a dumb example. I don't know why I gave that. But they'll tell us later on, that thing you said about the dog that came to your table and ate your food? Man, that really stuck with me, and that helped me to, we'll go, oh, I had no idea. Here I am this whole time thinking, why did I add that? That was just dumb. But it was because God knows what they needed to hear in order to unlock that part of their mind that was blocking them at the time. When we put ourselves in a position of service to God, God gives us the power to serve, the power to help heal, the power to give love, to transmit love, compassion, understanding, care, with truth and authority to where the other person can't deny it. And they can only deny it if they are willfully seeking to make you wrong. And therefore we know that they are still in spiritual darkness. And they are still choosing the Father who was a liar from the beginning, rather than the God and the Father example and Jesus, his example that we're trying to follow today. In which case, there's no point in me arguing with them and telling them that they're wrong. The only point for me at that point is to let them know I love them and I care about them. And then, when alone, go to God and pray for them. Say, God, please give them the awakening you gave to me, because they are suffering and they are hurting and they want to fight and they want to argue and they need to make everybody wrong and themselves right, because they themselves can't justify their own position. There is no reason for me to need to make you wrong and me right unless I myself, deep down inside somewhere, know I'm wrong. If I absolutely knew I was right about something, I wouldn't need to even tell anybody. Right? I love pizza. I don't need to convince anybody. I love pizza. You can either accept it or not. I don't care. Right? The truth does not need to be validated. There is so much Jesus taught us. But he also taught us about humanity through example of his human life and his human existence and his human expressions, found all throughout the Gospels in many different ways and many different reflections. And there is a tremendous amount of value there, not just in the spiritual messages and in the parables and all that other kind of stuff, but why he did them, how he did them, for what purpose, and the multiple levels that he was bridging the gap between the physical and the spiritual. And like I said, he himself called himself the Son of Man 80 times in the Gospels, because he wanted us to also accept that part and understand that part. Not just about the kingdom of heaven and God. That was the message he brought. But he is the full package. He's everything. He is the Alpha and the Omega, right? He is everything. And for me, it is a good idea that I do not overlook his humanity and his struggles as a human being, and how he handled those struggles, and how he dealt with being shamed and being questioned and being doubted and being mocked. What am I trying to prove to someone else who has willfully decided they're not going to listen anyway? Why do I feel the need to force them to? You will accept what I'm saying. It's only because I myself am not secure in what I myself am saying. I don't need to prove to anyone that I love pizza. It will it will not enhance or take away the fact. Now other people will go, I love pizza too. And now we can get together and both love pizza together, right? And people who, and here's the thing, people who say pizza sucks, I don't need to argue with them either. I understand how taste buds work and we all have different lives and stuff like that. I don't need to prove to them that pizza's best. I go, well, what is your favorite food? And they go, oh, that's my favorite. I love this. Let's go out to dinner. I'll order a pizza. You order that. We'll both have a great time. When something is the truth in us, and that's what we want to get at, and Christ himself gave us the example that we can live a life in truth physically. And with that type of prowess and that type of command over our flesh, simply by trusting God over ourselves. And I hope this was helpful to somebody today. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this stuff. Like I said, this isn't a Bible study, so I called it Exploring the Sanctuary. Those kind of talks where we just kind of talk about stuff. And this time I had to have notes because it was about Jesus Christ, his own personal example. But there'll probably be other talks where it's just talking, right? And of course, the after verses are specific talks about the previous Bible study. But as time goes on, hopefully we will expand it into many different rooms inside the sanctuary. And exploring the sanctuary is exploring those rooms. And this is the first video where I just wanted to explore some things about the humanity of Jesus, because I have been in awe over it since I was a kid, hearing the stories. And I don't want us to forget that that was an equal portion to his life and purpose here. And it was 100% required and necessary for us to identify with him, not just him identifying with us. So we can identify with the humanity of Christ, and we can follow his example and seek those things also. And where we struggle in that humanity, we can ask God for help and power and strength, and to put himself in the places within inside us that still wants to fight and argue and tell somebody else they're wrong. I love you guys. Thank you so much for allowing me to share.